Okay, so if you are trying this, locating the epicenters, and you're struggling with it, hopefully this video will help you. Okay, so when we are doing our difference here, 1, 2, 3, and 4, we're pretty straightforward, right? I'm going to do number 4 for us, and then I'm going to try a more challenging one. Okay, so number 4, remember you always do the S-wave travel time first, because that's always going to be the bigger number, because that's always the second wave to arrive at the seismic station. So I subtract the S minus P wave, like that. Oh, hold on. Oh, Mrs. Leonard. We're going to do that work down here, like this, so that way we have enough room for this. 40 minus 40 is 0. I can't do 5 minus 8, so I have to borrow. And that makes that 15. 15 minus 8 is 7. 3 minus 3 is 0. 10 minus 10 is 0. And so that gives me 7 minutes. So when I come up here, this should be 7 minutes. Okay? And then if I'm going to figure out my epicenter distance, this is where I need my BFF. And I'm going to use 7 minutes for that. This is on page 11 in your BFF. And I'm going to use a little slip of paper. I'm going to mark off the 0 right here on my paper, and I always label it so that I don't get mixed up with other marks that might be on my paper. And then this was 7 minutes exactly, which was my difference. So I'm going to mark off the 7 minutes. I know this is minutes because it tells me my travel time right here is minutes. And then the next step is to follow or move this paper all the way over so that the 0 lines up with this bottom line, which is the P wave line, and then my top line, which is my 7-minute line, is going to line up with the S wave line, which is this line right here. So I'm just going to slide this, and this is where you have to have patience with yourself, because this can be kind of challenging. If you go too far to the left, then the lines get closer together. That's because the time difference is getting closer together, or the times are getting closer together. And if you go too far to the right, then the times are getting farther apart from one another, right? So you want to find that just right spot in the middle. And then you also need to make sure that this paper is lined up perfectly with one of the lines. It could be a big thick line, or it could be one of these skinny non-bolded lines, but you want it to be lined up perfectly. So it just takes a little bit of time and patience with yourself, right? Sometimes I'll get them lined up perfectly, just like this, where the 0 is here, lined up with the P wave line, and the 7-minute line is lined up perfectly with the S wave line, but then when I look at my paper, I can see that it's not lined up vertically. So you just got to make sure that you're doing all of those things. Line up vertically, and now I can see it's perfectly vertical, and my 7's lined up, but now my 0 isn't. So this can get really frustrating. Just be patient with yourself, okay? And eventually, if you're patient and you just keep trying, you're like, okay, I'm going to try now. I'm lined up with this one, and I'm straight. And it's almost, it looks like I'm almost lined up with that 7 up there. Ugh, but not quite. So I'm going to try one more line over. Sometimes I'll do that. If I know I'm close, I'll line it up with a line, and I'm like, no, that's not right. So then I go to the next line, and I try to line it up, and I'm like, okay, 0 is lined up with that one. And the line is lined up, and I think I got it. So now I follow this straight down all the way to the bottom, and I read the distance off of the x-axis. Now it's 2 boxes over from the 5. Now this 5 is 5 times 10 to the third, so I know that that's got to be 5,000 kilometers. And so if that's 5,000 kilometers, then this is 5,200, this is 5,400, this is, or in other words, 5,200, 5,400, 5,600, 5,800, 6,000. Remember, these are each going by 200 kilometers. You should have that written down here if this is your own BFF. All right. So if I'm here, 2 boxes over is going to be 5,400. So I'm going to record that on my sheet here, 5,400 kilometers. Okay. So that's how we do that. Now, the more tricky ones are, for example, number 5 for the time. So some students were getting a little bit confused with number 5 for the time. I'm going to do that one for you. I'm going to zoom out here a little bit. So number 5, my time for my S wave is 21:29:00 minus 21:21:20. The problem here is that I cannot subtract 0 minus 20, right? So we have to borrow. Now, in most cases, and like what we did up here, we borrowed, we said, okay, so that's 29, that's going to make it 28, right? I'm borrowing a minute. But when we jump over these colons, we're borrowing a minute here, and we need to convert it into seconds. So if we borrow this minute, how many seconds are in a minute? How many seconds are in a minute? You should have guessed 60, or you should have known that it was 60. So I have to take 60 seconds and add it to the 0 seconds I have here. 60 plus 0 is 60. So I'm going to cross that out and put 60 seconds here. As long as you're within, like what we did up here, as long as you're within the colons, you're between these 2 colons and you're borrowing, regular old borrowing rules apply. Okay, we just borrowed the regular old-fashioned way. But if we have to jump over the colon and we have to borrow something from one side of the colon and add it to the other side of the colon, you have to remember that you're borrowing a minute and turning it into seconds. Or you're borrowing an hour and you're turning it into minutes. That might happen too. Okay, so 60 minus 20 is 40. 28 minus 21, or 8 minus 1 is 7. 2 minus 2 is 0. 21 minus 21 is 0. So we should end up with 7 minutes and 40 seconds. So up here I'm going to write 0, 0, 7, and 40. And then you do the same thing to figure out your epicenter distance using your BFF and your little slip of paper, just like we did before. If you need to rewind the video, you can do that, so that way you remember how to do those steps. Or you can just look at your steps in your input pages on page 35 if you're first period, or 37 if you're the rest of the classes. And that will help you with that, okay? All right, one more challenging one, and we're going to do number 8. Okay, so number 8 is right here. Number 8, we're going to do 9 hours. That's our S wave arrival time, is 36 minutes and 15 seconds, because that's my S wave. The S wave is always the first one. Minus 9 hours, 32 minutes, and 24 seconds. That was my P wave. Now when I subtract, I'm doing the same thing. Zoom in here so you can see it really well. Right? I cannot subtract 15 minus 24. So I'm going to borrow a minute from here, make that 35 minutes. And now I'm going to add my 60 seconds to this 15 seconds. Well, 60 plus 15, 60 plus 15, maybe you can do that in your head, maybe you can't. If you can't, here we go, 60 plus 15. It's perfectly fine to use a calculator. You're going to get a calculator on any quiz that we do, and certainly on the Regents exam. So 60 plus 15, so remember I'm adding the 60 seconds that I borrowed, because I borrowed a minute here, And now I'm adding those 60 seconds to this 15 because I can't just ignore that these 15 seconds are here. So I'm going to cross that out, and I'm going to put 75 here because I borrowed the minute, add the 60 seconds, and now I've got 75. Okay. Now I can subtract. 5 minus 4 is 1. 7 minus 2 is 5. And then 5 minus 2 is 3. 3 minus 3 is 0. 9 minus 9 is 0. And you get 3 minutes and 51 seconds. My biggest clue if I did something wrong is that one of these numbers is over 60. Because I know I can't have more than 60 seconds, and I know I can't have more than 60 minutes. So if I ever end up with something bigger than that, then I know I did it wrong. Right? And then I know I just have to go back and remember how I have to borrow. Okay? So hopefully that helps you out. And I hope that helps. Thanks.